I think a decent amount of our audience probably has. But for those people who've never heard the name Eugene V. Debs, who is Eugene V. Debs, or who was, I should say, Eugene V. Debs?
Eugene Victor Debs. He was a labor organizer, a union man through and through, and the co-founder of the Socialist Party of America in 1901. His cohort, Austrian Jewish immigrant Victor Berger.
And he, of course, was one of the founding members of the Industrial Workers of the World, or we know them as the Wobblies.
Yes, the IWW, correct. Yes, thank you for asking or saying that. Yes, he also, along with Big Bill Haywood and other fine people, he was one of the founders of that industrial union.
Now, so give us a sense of his, I guess, his journey. At a young age, my understanding was that he was a member of the Democratic Party early in his career, and we're talking, this is probably the mid 1870s or so, maybe a little bit later than that. I mean, give us a sense of his early life and just sort of the trajectory of his career, how he went from being a Democrat to a socialist. Well,
he was brought up at a home, not really, well, I guess you could say middle class, working class, a little, somewhere in between there. Both his parents were from the Alsace-Lorraine region, immigrants to America. At age 14, he left school, became a paint scraper on the railroads, that the line going between Terre Haute and Indianapolis and around there. And after working for about a year and seeing, a lot of people, the struggle of workers, he just started doing some reading, thinking about this. But as you said, he was a Democrat. He eventually was on the city council, actually, as a Democrat. But it didn't do anything real major, creating his legacy just then. It was when he decided to form the American Railroad Union, and the various railroad workers in 1894, when they decided to go out on a Pullman strike. And he didn't. In fact, he did not encourage his workers to join the strike. He thought, we're not ready yet, we're not strong enough, and we're going to lose this one. But there were wildcat strikes, and it really started to grow. And so he backed his union mates and did the best he could. He was, giving lectures and on the picket lines. But he stressed, let's not get violent, and we have to be careful, because the one thing that they were worried about is Grover Cleveland, then president, said if you stop any trains that are carrying mail across state lines, then you've broken federal law. Well, that was their pretense to come in heavy-handed with the police and the batons and et cetera. And they called up the soldiers. Cut to he's indicted. He's one of the people blamed for the strike, breaking the law, and he's put into prison in 1896. And just 6 months, but long enough for him to...
Let me just also give people a sense of what we're talking about in terms of workers. We're talking about, my understanding is somewhere around 250,000 strikers across the country. This is a nationwide Pullman strike. Right. And like you say, the feds, the pretense in which they moved in had to do with the transportation of the mail across those state lines. As soon as you go across state lines, it becomes a federal issue. So they put him in prison. And now we're talking about the mid 1890s, I believe.
Right, 1896. He's in prison, and he starts, he's reflecting, he's reading. He was always an avid reader. And Victor Berger actually visits him and gives him some Das Kapital by Engels and Karl Marx, and other literature about a different economic system, a socialist system that had been growing already in Europe, and he reads and he reads. He also was reading the Bible, because he did not he looked upon Christianity as just a form of democracy in action, if you really follow the tenets of Christianity. And he looked at Jesus as this kind of revolutionary. Anyhow, he comes out and he sees that you have to organize the workers, organize the unions, but there's an alternative way, and it's not going to be through the Democratic Party, which he saw a lot of the people who were in power were bought off by the bosses, by the CEOs, by magnates of various corporations, and the working class people, the majority of the people in the United States were getting the shaft, getting shafted. And so...
let me ask you this, though. When he goes into prison as a result of the strike, I imagine it was fairly big news, right? We're talking about a national strike.
Oh, yes, it was big news. The whole people knew Debs already because he had already been lecturing across the country. It wasn't like he was just staying in Indiana. He was known from the East Coast to the West Coast to the South to the Northwest. And what
was the perspective of the population? I mean, in terms of his arrest, I mean, I would imagine that the strike inhibited people's travel, and so it was a nuisance in some respects. But what was the popular sentiment about imprisoning him?
Well, from my readings, as you said, some people, yes, they thought he deserved it because it made life unbearable, and people who thought, these workers, these immigrants, people don't even speak a very good English, if English at all. They're asking for too much. They should be grateful for what's coming to them, et cetera, et cetera. But the workers, and we're not talking about as you said, we're talking about millions of workers who had heard of his name or seen him in person, read about him in newspapers, in magazines. He was already a known figure. The American Railroad Union had many thousands of members. He grew up from zero to a very strong union. But they lost, they lost a lot in the Pullman strike, and so he had to regain back the rights and certain wages and just working conditions. And he just realized that the Democratic Party was never going to really represent the true, honest needs of the workers. They were going to give some lip service and do some things, some Band-Aid changes to the social economic system. But he really saw we need a true change. And so when he comes out, eventually he meets with others. He meets with Daniel De Leon, that's New York, other leading social thinkers, leftists, people that would be called socialists today, and he begins to become the champion. He becomes the spokesperson of socialism in America. And the one reason is, first of all, he was very bright and he was an eloquent speaker, but he never talked down to the workers. They said, those days, you didn't have a megaphone; you had to just project your voice, and people barely understood a word, but they said, barely understood him because he was speaking English, and let's say they're a Polish worker or a Jewish worker and they only know Yiddish or Polish, a little bit of English. But there was something about the passion in his eyes, and he would stretch out his hands. There's many of the famous photos, and you could see the bulging veins in his neck. He lived this. He breathed this. He didn't just talk the talk; he walked the walk. And here.
Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to hear a little bit more of Eugene Debs' life, and I want to hear why you decided 5 years ago to set out to make a documentary about this guy whose relevance has certainly come to the forefront, in particular in the wake and I guess in leading up to Bernie Sanders' run for president in 2016. We got to take a quick break. This is Ring of Fire Radio. I'm Sam Seder. We'll be right back with more.